Get to Old Navy today for a deal you won't want to miss. Today and tomorrow only, get boys and girls polos for just $3. Yep, boys and girls polos just $3 at Old Navy and OldNavy.com. Valid 7/14 to 7/15. Select styles, limit 5.
Welcome to the Brief History Podcast. Brief history comprehensively packed in under an hour, perfect for your commute to work, on your lunch break, or in your precious free time. Today's episode is on Syria and the ongoing civil wars and the history behind it. Thank you once again for everybody who's reviewed since the last episode. Thank you for To Expectant Father, who said it's perfect for his uni work, just the information he wants. And thank you for Gloss123, who have said it's just what he's looking for, enough information to keep him going, but not too much to overbear him. So thank you. As always, we're on all social media channels. We're at Facebook and Twitter and on Instagram at B History Podcast. We're also on Snapchat also. Continue to like, share, follow, tell your friends, review, leave us any messages, get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. Please may it continue. If anybody else would like to review the podcast, please do. We will read them out further in further episodes, and please reach out to us and let me know if there's any wars, any histories you want to hear about. We'd be more than happy to talk about those on future episodes. Please let us know. The Syrian Civil War is an ongoing multi-sided armed conflict in Syria, fought preliminary between the government of President Bashar al-Assad along with its allies and various forces opposing both the government and each other in varying constellations. The unrest in Syria, part of a wider wave of the 2011 Arab Spring protests, grew out of discontent with the Assad government and escalated to an armed conflict after protests calling for his removal was violently suppressed. The war is being fought by several factions: the Syrian government and its international allies, a loose alliance of Sunni Arab rebels, including the Free Syrian Army, the majority-Kurdish Syrian Democratic Forces, the SDF, Salafi jihadist groups including al-Nusra Front, and the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, the ISIL, with a number of countries in the region and beyond being either directly involved or rendering support to one another or faction. Iran, Russia and Hezbollah support the government of Syria military, while Russia conducted air operations in September 2015. On the other hand, the US-led international coalition, which was established in 2014 and just recent weeks in 2018 declared a purpose of countering ISIL, have conducted airstrikes against ISIL in Syria, including the US and France in a recent chemical weapons attack. That's of April 2018. These against government and pro-government targets. International organisations have accused the Syrian government, ISIL and rebel groups of severe human rights and on many massacres. The conflict has caused major refugee crisis. Over the course of the war, a number of peace initiatives have been launched, including March 2017 Geneva peace talks on Syria led by United Nations, but fighting continues. Syria had become an independent republic in 1946, following years of French rule after World War II, although democratic rule ended with a coup in March 1949, followed by 2 more coups the same year. A popular uprising against military rule in 1954 saw the army transfer power to civilians. From 1958 to 61, a brief union with Egypt replaced Syria's parliamentary system with a centralised presidential government. The secular Ba'athist Syrian regional branch government came to power through a successful coup d'état in 1963. For the next several years, Syria went through additional coups and changes in leadership. In March 1971, al-Assad, al-ḥarb, declared himself president, a position he held until his death until 2000. Since 1970, the secular Syrian regional branch has remained the dominant political authority in which had been a one-sided party state until the first multi-party election to the People's Council of Syria was held in 2012. On the 31st of January 1973, al-Assad implemented a new constitution which led to a national crisis. Unlike previous constitutions, this one did not require that the President of Syria be a Muslim, leading to fierce demonstrations in Hama, Homs, Aleppo, organised by the Muslim Brotherhood and the ulama. They labelled Assad the enemy of Allah and called for a jihad against his rule. The government survived a series of armed revolts by Islamists, mainly members of the Muslim Brotherhood, from 1976 until 1982. Upon Hafez al-Assad's death in 2000, his son Bashar al-Assad was elected as president of Syria. Bashar al-Assad and his wife Asma, a Sunni Muslim born and educated in Britain, initially inspired hopes for democratic reforms. The Damascus Spring, a period of social and political debate, took place between July 2000 and August 2001. The Damascus Spring largely ended in August 2001 with the arrest and imprisonment of 10 leading activists, which had called for democratic elections and a campaign of civil disobedience. In the opinion of his critics, Bashar al-Assad had failed to deliver on promised reforms. President Bashar al-Assad maintains that no moderate opposition to his rule exists and that all opposition forces are jihadists intent on destroying his secular leadership. In an April 2017 interview with Croatian newspaper Syrian List, he reasserts his view that terrorist groups operating in Syria are, quote, linked to agendas of foreign countries, end quote. Syrian Arabs, together with some 600,000 Palestinian Arabs, make up roughly 74% of the population. This excludes Syrian Christians. Syria's Muslims are 74% Sunnis and 13% Shias, from which about 2% are Murshidis, 3% are Druze, while the remaining 10% are Christians. Not all of Syria's Sunnis are Arabs. The Assad family is mixed. Bashar is married to a Sunni with whom he has several children. He is affiliated with the sect that his parents belong to, the minority al-White sect. Al-Whites control Syria's security apparatus. The majority of Syria's Christians belong to Eastern Christian churches, such as the branches of the Eastern Catholic Churches, Syriac Orthodox Church, Greek Orthodox Church of Antioch, Assyrian Church of East, and the Armenian Orthodox Church, which has existed in the region since the 1st century AD. Syrian Kurds, an ethnic minority making up approximately 9% of the population, have endured ethnic discrimination and the denial of their cultural and linguistic rights, as well as the frequent denial of their citizenship, for the history of the Syrian state. Turkmen are estimated to be 3 to 5% of the population. Assyrians, and indigenous Eastern Aramaic-speaking Christian Semitic people, numbering approximately 400,000, are found mainly in northeast Syria. A larger population lives over the border in northern Iraq. Other ethnic groups included Armenians, Syrians, Turkmens, Greeks, Malawani, Kawaliya, Yazidi, Shakbaks and Madins. Socio-economic inequality increased significantly after free market policies were initiated by Hafez al-Assad in his later years, and it accelerated after Bashar al-Assad came to power. With an emphasis on service sector, these policies benefited a minority of the nation's population, mostly people who had connections with the government and members of the Sunni merchant class of Damascus and Aleppo. In 2010, Syria's nominal GDP per capita was only $2,834, comparable to sub-Saharan African countries such as Nigeria and far lower than its neighbours such as Lebanon, and with an annual growth rate of 3.39%, below most other developing countries. The country also faced particularly high youth unemployment rates. At the start of the war, discontent against the government was strongest in Syria's poor areas, predominantly among conservative Sunnis. These included cities with high poverty rates such as Dara and Homs, and the poorer districts of large cities. This coincided with the most intense drought ever recorded in Syria, which lasted from 2006 to 2011 and resulted in widespread crop failure, an increase in food prices, and a mass migration of farming families to urban centres. This migration strained infrastructure already burdened by the influx of some 1.5 million refugees from the Iraq War. The drought had been linked to anthropogenic global warming. Adequate water supply continues to be an issue in the ongoing civil war and is frequently the target of military action. The human rights situation in Syria has long been the subject of harsh critique from global organisations. The rights of free expression, association and assembly were strictly controlled in Syria even before the uprising. The country was under emergency rule from 1963 until 2011, and gathered public of more than 5 people were banned. Security forces have sweeping powers of arrest and detention. Authorities have harnessed and imprisoned human rights activists and other critics of the government, who were often detained indefinitely and tortured while under prison-like conditions. Women and ethnic minorities face discrimination in the public sector. Thousands of Syrian Kurds were denied citizenship in 1962 and their descendants were labelled foreigners. A number of riots in 2004 prompted increased tensions in Syrian Kurdistan. There have been occasional clashes between Kurdish protesters and security forces ever since. Despite hope for democratic change with the 2000 Damascus Spring, Bashar al-Assad was widely regarded as having failed to implement any improvements. A Human Rights Watch report issued just before the beginning of the 2011 uprising stated that he failed to subsequently improve the state of human rights since taking power. Protests began on the 15th of March 2011, and when protesters marched in the capital of Damascus, demanded democratic reforms and the release of political prisoners. Security forces retaliated by opening fire on the protesters, and according to witnesses who spoke to the BBC, the government forces detained 6. The protest was triggered by the arrest of a boy and his friend by the government for writing in graffiti, quote, "The people want the fall of the government," end quote. In the city of Darara, a 13-year-old boy, Hazmat al-Khattab, was tortured and killed. The government claims that the boys weren't attacked and that Qatar incited the majority of the protest. Writer and analyst Loa al-Hussein referencing the Arab Spring ongoing at that time, wrote that, quote, Syria is now on the map of countries in the region with an uprising, end quote. On the 20th of March, the protesters burned down a Ba'athist party headquarters and other buildings. The ensuing clashes claimed the lives of 7 police officers and 15 protesters. 10 days later, in a speech, President Bashar al-Assad blamed foreign conspirators pushing Israeli propaganda for the protests. Until the 7th of April, the protesters predominantly demanded democratic reforms, release of political prisoners, an increase in freedoms, abolition of the emergency law, and an end to corruption. After the 8th of April, the emphasis in demonstration slogans shifted slowly towards a call to overthrow the Assad government. Protests spread. On the 8th of April, they occurred simultaneously in 10 cities. By Friday, the 22nd of April, protests occurred in 20 cities. By the end of May 2011, 1,000 civilians and 150 soldiers and policemen had been killed and thousands detained. Among the arrested were many students, liberal activists and human rights advocates. Significant armed resistance against the state security took place on the 4th of June 2011 in Jisr al-Shughur. Unverified reports claimed that a proportion of security forces in Jisr were defected after secret police and intelligence officers executed soldiers who refused to fire on the civilians. Later, more protesters in Syria took up arms and more soldiers defected to protect protesters. The early insurgency phase of the Syrian Civil War lasted from late July 2011 to April 2012 and was associated with the rise of armed oppositional militias across Syria and the beginning of an armed rebellion against the authorities of the Syrian Arab Republic. The beginning of the insurgency is typically marked by formation of the Free Syrian Army, the FSA, on the 29th of July 2011, when a group of defected soldiers declared the establishment of the first organised oppositional military force. Composed of defected Syrian armed personnel, the rebel army aimed to remove Bashar al-Assad and his government from power. This period of war saw the initial civil uprising take on many characteristics of civil war, according to several outside observers, including United Nations Commissions on Human Rights, as armed elements became better organised and began carrying out successful attacks in retaliation for the crackdown by the Syrian government on demonstrators and defectors. The Arab League monitoring mission, initiated in December 2011, ended in failure by February 2012 as Syrian troops and the oppositional militants continued to do battle across the country, and the Syrian government prevented foreign observers from touring active battlefields, including besieged oppositional strongholds. In early 2012, Kofi Annan acted as the UN Arab League Joint Special Representative for Syria. His peace plan provided for a ceasefire, but even as the negotiations for it were being conducted, the rebels in the Syrian army continued fighting even after the peace plan. The United Nations-backed ceasefire was brokered by Special Envoy Kofi Annan and declared in mid-April 2012. The 2012-2013 escalation of the civil war was the third phase of the Syrian Civil War, which gradually evolved from a UN-mandated ceasefire attempt during April-May 2012, turning into radical violence in June, escalating the conflict level to a full-fledged civil war. Following the Hula massacre of 25th of May 2012, in which 108 people were summarily executed, the subsequent FSA ultimatum to the Syrian government, the ceasefire practically collapsed as the FSA began nationwide offences against government troops. On the 1st of June 2012, President Assad vowed to crush the anti-government uprising. On the 12th of June 2012, the UN for the first time officially proclaimed Syria to be in a state of civil war. The conflict began moving into the two largest cities, Damascus and Aleppo. Following October 2012 ceasefire failure, during the winter of 2012-13, early spring of 2013, the rebels continued advances on all fronts. In mid-December 2012, American officials said that the Syrian government began firing Scud ballistic missiles at rebel fighters inside Syria. On the 11th of January 2013, Islamist groups, including al-Nusra Front, took full control of Taftanaz air base in the Idlib government after weeks of fighting. In mid-January 2013, as clashes re-erupted between rebels and Kurdish forces in Ras al-Ain, YPG forces moved to expel government forces from oil-rich areas in Haskella province. By the 6th of March 2013, the rebels captured the city of Raqqa, effectively making it the first provincial capital to be lost by the Assad government. The advances of rebels were finally arrested in April 2013 as Syrian Arab Army could reorganise and initiate offences. On the 17th of April 2013, government forces breached a 6-month rebel blockade in Wadi al-ʼahliyyah near Idlib. Heavy fighting was reported around the town of Berlin after government troops attempted to secure control of a main highway leading to Aleppo. The break in the siege also allowed government forces to resupply 2 major military bases in the region, which had been relying on sporadic airdrops. In April 2013, government and Hezbollah forces who had increasingly become involved in fighting launched an offensive to capture areas near al-Qusar. On the 21st of April, pro-Assad forces captured the town of Burhaniya, Sakraya and al-Radawiyah near the Lebanese border. From July 13, however, the situation became a stalemate, with fighting continuing on all fronts between various factions with numerous casualties, but without major territorial changes. On the 28th of June 2013, rebel forces captured a major military checkpoint in the city of Darara. Shortly after, Syria opposition factions declared war on the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, ISIL, which turned increasingly dominant throughout the war zone with indiscriminate killing of all, whether loyalist Assad or rebels. A major advance took place on the 6th of August 2013 as rebels captured Menga military airbase after a 10-month siege. On the 21st of August, a chemical attack took place in Ghouta region of the Damascus countryside, leading to thousands of casualties and several hundred dead in the opposition-held stronghold. The attack was followed by a military offensive by government forces into the area, which had been hotbeds of the opposition. The attack, largely attributed to Assad forces, caused the international community to seek disarmament of the Syrian Arab Army from chemical weapons. In late 2013, the period was marked by increasing initiatives of the Syrian Arab Army, which led offensives against opposition fighters on several fronts. The Syrian Arab Army, along with its allies Hezbollah and the Abbas Brigade, launched an offensive on Damascus and Aleppo in November. Fighting between Kurdish forces, rebels and al-Nusra Front continued in other locations. Tensions between moderate rebel forces and ISIS had been high since ISIS captured the border town of Azaz from FSA forces on 18th of September 2013. Conflict was renewed over Assad in early October, and in late November ISIS captured the border town of Atmi from an FSA brigade. On the 3rd of January 2014, the army of Mujahideen, the Free Syrian Army and the Islamic Front launched an offensive against ISIS in Aleppo and Idlib governorates. A spokesman for the rebels said the rebels attacked ISIS in up to 80% of all ISIS-held villages in Idlib and 65% of these in Aleppo. By the 6th of January, opposition rebels managed to expel ISIS forces from the city of Raqqa, ISIS's largest stronghold and the capital of Raqqa governorate. On the 8th of January, opposition rebels expelled most ISIS forces from the city of Aleppo. However, ISIS reinforcements from Deir ez-Zor governorate managed to retake several neighbourhoods of the city of Raqqa. By mid-January, ISIS retook the entire city of Raqqa, while rebels expelled ISIS fighters fully from Aleppo cities and the villages west of it. On the 29th of January, Turkish aircraft near the border fired on an ISIS convoy inside the Aleppo province of Syria, killing 11 ISIS fighters and 1 ISIS emir. In late January, it was confirmed that the rebels had assassinated ISIS second-in-command Haji Bakr, who was al-Qaeda's military council head and a former military officer in Saddam Hussein's army. By mid-February, the al-Nusra front joined the battle in support of rebel forces and expelled ISIS from Deir ez-Zor governorate. By March, the ISIL forces fully retreated from the Idlib. On the 4th of March, ISIL retreated from the border town of Assad and other nearby villages, choosing instead to consolidate around Raqqa in anticipation of escalated fighting with al-Nusra. On the 4th of March, the Syrian Army took control of al-Assad in the Qalamon region. On the 8th of March, government forces took over Zara in Homs, further blocking rebel supply routes from Lebanon. On the 11th of March, government forces and Hezbollah took control of Rimi Farm region, directly facing Yabrud. On the 16th of March, Hezbollah and government forces captured Yabrud after 3 Syrian Army fighters made an unexpected withdrawal, leaving the al-Nusra front to fight in city on its own. On the 18th of March, Israel used artillery against a Syrian army base after 4 of his soldiers had been wounded by a roadside bomb while patrolling the Golan Heights. On the 19th of March, the Syrian army captured Ras al-Ain near Yabrud after 2 days of fighting and al-Hassan in Homs governor, while rebels in Darara governor captured Darara prison and freed hundreds of detainees. On the 20th of March, the Syrian army took control of Kratez Chivirez in al-Hassan. On the 29th of March, Syrian army took control of the villages of Flita, Razmara near the border of Lebanon. On the 22nd of March, rebels took control of the Kisab border post in the al-ʼahliyyah. By the 23rd of March, rebels had taken most of the Khan Sheikhun in Hama. During clashes near the rebel-controlled Kisab border post in al-ʼahliyyah, al-Assad, NDF leader in al-ʼahliyyah, and one of Bashar al-Assad's cousins was killed by rebel fighters. On the 4th of April, rebels captured the town of Babilin Idlib. On the 9th of April, the Syrian army took control of Rankos in Qalamon region. On the 12th of April, rebels in Aleppo stormed the government-held Ramishia industrial district in an attempt to cut the army supply route between the airport and a large army base. The rebels also took the Rashidin neighbourhood and parts of the Jama al-Sahara district. On the 26th of April, the Syrian army took control of al-Zababini. According to SOHR, rebels took control of Tel al-Mara Quintutra. Rebels in Dara also took over Brigade 61 base and the 74th Battalion. On the 26th of April, the FSA announced that they had begun an offensive against ISIS in the Raqqa Governorate and seized 2 towns west of Raqqa city. On the 29th of April, activists said that the Syrian army captured Tal Barak near the town of Marasha in Quintatra without clashes. On the 7th of May, a truce went into effect in the city of Homs. The terms of the agreement included safe evacuation of Islamist fighters from the city, which would then fall under government control in exchange for release of prisoners and safe passage of humanitarian aid from the Ba and the Sahari, 2 Shiite enclaves besieged by the rebels. On the 18th of May, the head of the Syrian Armed Defense, General Hussein Ishaq, died of wounds sustained during the rebel attack on an air defense base near Milaha the previous day. In Hama, rebel forces took control of the town of al-Malaa, killing 34 pro-Assad fighters at an army post near the town. It conceded control marked the 3rd time rebels had taken control of the town. Syria held a presidential election in government-held areas on the 3rd of June 2014. For the first time in the history of Syria, more than one person was allowed to stand as a presidential candidate. More than 9,000 polling stations were set up in government-held areas. According to the Supreme Constitutional Court of Syria, 11.63 million Syrians voted. The turnout was 73.49%. President Bashar al-Assad won the election with 87.7% of the votes. As Assad's challengers, Hassan al-Nuri received 4.3% of the votes and Mahir Harja received 3.2%. Allies of Assad from more than 30 countries were invited by the Syrian government to follow the presidential election, including Bolivia, Brazil, Cuba, Ecuador, India, Iran, Iraq, Nicaragua, Russia, South Africa and Venezuela. The Iranian official Aladdin Baradurji read a statement by the group saying the election was, quote, free, fair and transparent, end quote. The Gulf Cooperation Council, the European Union and the United States all dismissed the election as illegitimate and a farce. State employees were told to vote or face interrogation. On the ground, there was no independent monitors stationed at the polling station. It is claimed in an opinion piece that as few as 6 million eligible voters remained in Syria. Due to rebel and Kurdish and ISIS control of Syrian territories, there was no roughly 6% voting in the country. According to the Syrian Observation of Human Rights, on the 17th of July 2014, ISIL took control of the Shah oil field, killing 90 pro-government forces while losing 21 fighters. In addition, 270 guards and government-aligned fighters were missing. About 30 government persons managed to escape to the nearby Harja field. On the 20th of July, the Syrian army secured the field, although fighting continued in its outskirts. On the 25th of July, the Islamic State took control of Division 17 base near Raqqa. On the 7th of August 2014, ISIL took the Brigade 93 base in Raqqa using weapons captured from their offensive in Iraq. Multiple suicide bombs also went off before the base was stormed. On the 13th of August, ISIL forces took the towns of Akhtarin and Turkmenbura from the rebels in Aleppo. ISIL forces also took a handful of nearby villages. The other towns seized include Mesouda, Dabik and Goz. On the 14th of August, after being captured by the al-Nusra front, the Free Syrian Army commander Sharif al-Safari admitted to working with Israel and receiving anti-tank weapons from the Israel, the FSA soldiers also receiving medical treatment. it is possible that confessions were obtained under duress. On the 14th of August, the Syrian Army, as well as Hezbollah militias, took the town of Mehari in Rifdeski Governorate. The Supreme Military Council, the FSA, denied claims of Mehera seizure, and rather the rebels had redeployed from recent advances to other defensive lines. Mehera had been held by the Islamic Front. Rebels had used the town to fire mortars on government-held areas inside Damascus. Meanwhile, ISIS forces in Raqqa were launching a siege at Tabraka Air Base, the Syrian government's last military base in Raqqa. Kouairis Air Base in Aleppo also came under fierce attack by ISIL. On the 16th of August 2014, there were reports that 22 people were killed in the village of Dara by a bomb outside a mosque. The bomb was thought to be detonated by ISIS. Also, on the 16th of August, the Islamic State seized the village of Bendan in Aleppo Governorate from rebels. On the 17th of August 2014, SOHR said that in the past 2 weeks, ISIL jihadists had killed over 700 tribal members in oil-rich Deir ez-Zor. On the 19th of August, Abu Abdullah al-Iraqi, a senior figure in ISIL, had helped prepare and plan car and suicide bombs across Syria, Lebanon and Iraq, was killed. Some reports said that he had been killed by Hezbollah fighters. There were also several reports that he was killed by Syrian Army in the Qalam region near the border with Lebanon. In Raqqa, the Syrian Army control over the town al-ḥarb. ISIL reportedly sent out reinforcement from Iraq to the governor of Raqqa. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said at least 400 ISIL fighters had also been wounded in previous 5 days in clashes with the Syrian Army and the National Defence Force in Raqqa alone. At the same time, several senior UK and US figures urged Turkey to stop allowing ISIL to cross the border to Syria and Iraq. It was around this time that the Americans realised that the Turks had no intention of ceding their side of the border, so Washington decided to work with the Syrian Kurds to close off the border on the Syrian side. A year later, with the Kurds in control of most of the Turkey-Syrian border, the Syrian army advancing under Russian air support to seal the remainder, the situation was causing great ruptures in Ankara. On the 26th of August 2014, the Syrian Air Force carried out airstrikes against ISIL in the governorate of Deir ez-Zor. This was the first time the Syrian army attacked them in Deir ez-Zor, as the Syrian army pulled out of Raqqa and shifted for its oil and natural gas resources, where strategically splitting ISIL territories. American jets began bombing ISIL in Syria in 23rd of September 2014, raising US involvement in the country. At least 20 targets in and around Raqqa were hit. The opposition group, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, said, quote, foreign partners participating in the strikes with the United States were Bahrainian, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar and Jordan. End quote. The US and partner nation forces began striking ISIL using fighters, bombers, Tomahawk missiles. Pentagon spokesman Rear Admiral John Kirby said, US aircraft including B-1 bombers, F-16s, F-18s and Predator drones, with F-18s flying missions off the USS George H.W. Bush in the Persian Gulf. Tomahawk missiles were fired from the destroyer US Arleigh Burke in the Red Sea. Syria's foreign minister told the Associated Press the US informed Syria's envoy to the UN that, quote, strikes would be launched against the terrorist groups in Raqqa, end quote. The United States informed the Free Syrian Army beforehand of the impending airstrikes, and the rebels said that weapons transfers to the Free Syrian Army had begun. The United States also attacked a specific faction of al-Nusra called the Khorasan Group, who, according to the United States, had training camps and plans for attacking the United States in the future. For its part, Turkey launched an official request to the UN for a no-fly zone over Syria. The same day, Israel shot down a Syrian warplane after it entered the Golan area from Quintara. By the 3rd of October 2014, ISIL forces were heavily shelling the city of Kobani and were within a kilometre of the town. Within 36 hours from the 21st of October, the Syrian Army force carried out over 200 airstrikes on rebel-held areas across Syria and US, and Arab attacked ISIL positions in Kobani. Syria Information Minister Omran al-Zabi said the YPG forces in Kobani had provided with military and logistical support. Syria reported its air forces had destroyed 2 air fighter jets operated by IS. By the 26th of January, the Kurdish YPG forced ISIL to retreat from Kobani, thus fully recapturing the city. The US later confirmed that the city had been cleared of ISIL forces, and ISIL admitted defeat in Kobani city 3 days later, although they vowed to return. In February 2014, the southern front of the Free Syrian Army formed in southern Syria. 6 months later, they started a string of victories in Darara and Quintara during the 2014 offensive. The Darari offensive, the Battle of Kamashkin, and the Battle of Bosra 2015, and the Battle of Nasi border crossing. A government counter-offensive during this period that included the IRGC and Hezbollah recaptured 15 towns, villages and hills, but the operation slowed soon after and stalled. Since early 2015, opposition military operations rooms based in Jordan and Turkey began increasing cooperation with Saudi Arabia, and Qatar also reportedly agree upon the necessity to unite opposition factions against the Syrian government. In late October 2014, a conflict erupted between the al-Nusra Front on one side and the Western-backed SRF and Hazem movement on the other. By the end of February 2015, al-Nusra had defeated both groups, captured the entire Kiwani mountain region in Idlib province and several towns and military bases in other governments, and seized weapons supplied by the CIA to 2 moderate groups. The significant amount of weapons seized include a small number of BGM-71 anti-tank missiles similar to the weapon system al-Nusra Front had previously captured from government stockpile, such as the French Milans, Russian HJ-8s and the Russian 9K111 fagots. Reuters reported that this represented al-Nusra crushing pro-Western rebels in the north of the country. According to FSA commanders in northern Syria, however, the elimination of Hazrat Azam and the SRF was a welcome development due to the leaders of these factions allegedly were involved in corruption. The Western-backed 30th Division of SSA remained active elsewhere in Idlib. On the 24th of March 2015, the al-Nusra Front dominated most of the Idlib province except for the government-held provincial capital, Idlib, which had been encircled on 3 sides along their Islamic allies. Therefore, they joined together to form the Army of Conquest on this day. On the 28th of March, a joint coalition of Islamic forces, the Army of Conquest, captured Idlib. This left the northern largely taken by Sham, al-Nusra Front and other Islamic rebels, with the south of the country becoming the last significant foothold for mainstream non-jihadist opposition leader fighters. On the 22nd of April, a new rebel offensive was launched to the north of Syria, and by the 25th of of April, the rebel coalition Army of Conquest had captured the city of Jisr al-Shagur at the end of the following month. The rebels also seized the al-Mashkuma military base in Araha, leaving government forces in control of a tiny pocket of Idlib, including Abu Durhura military airport. In addition, according to Chad Lister, Brookings Doha Centre, the Army of Conquest coalition was a broad opposition effect to ensure that the al-Qaeda affiliated al-Nusra front was contained, with the rearguard involvement of Western-backed factions being regarded as crucial. Still, according to some, FSA in northern Syria had by this point all dissipated. Many of the moderate fighters joined more extremist organisations such as Ahad al-Sham, the largest faction in the Army of Conquest, which led to the subsequent rise of this Islamist Army of Conquest coalition. Rebel advances led to the government and Hezbollah morale plunging dramatically. In northeast Syria, these losses were countered by Hezbollah-led offensives in the Qalamum mountain north of Damascus on the border of Lebanon that gave Hezbollah effective control of the entire area. Thank you for listening to part 1, the Syrian Civil War. Please look out for episode 2 following next week. I've been your host, Andrew Knight. Music, composing and producing has been done by Harry Edmondson. Please subscribe to the Brief History podcast. If you subscribe, the next episodes will be automatically downloaded. That way you don't have to do anything further. Please like and review. It really does help. A 5-star review will do wonders for the podcast. Like any new podcast, we rely on the generosity of the listeners. So any interaction on our social medias, Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, Instagram, we're Be History Podcast throughout. Any likes, retweets, follows, shares, it all does wonders. So please help us out in this way. A small act like that will only take less than 30 seconds will really help us out. Think of that as your good deed. Please review also, that would be wonderful. Thank you very much. Please reach out to us and talk. We love hearing from you. Tell us what you think. If there is any corrections, let me know, and we'll read them out also like we have done in the past. And please tune in next week for part 2. Look at our previous episodes, catch up on all the others. We've posted episodes on the SAS, the Spanish-American War, the Armenian Genocide Part 1 and 2, the Indian Mutinies Part 1 and 2, the Boer Wars and the Zulu Wars. And please let us know what you think of those also. I've been your host, Andrew Knight. Thank you once again. This is the Brief History Podcast. History comprehensively packed in under an hour, perfect for your commute home, on your lunch break, or in your precious free time.
My mom has a permanently stuck in the 80s thing. We're talking teased up feathered hair, acid wash denim jacket, and shoulder pads. So many shoulder pads. But I just got a new phone from AT&T, and check this out. I got a second phone to gift my mom. So now she can finally ditch her old one for a phone that can actually stream all the 80s shows she loves.
Come into an AT&T store and find out how to get a smartphone on us. AT&T, more for your thing. That's our thing. See store for details.